What if I told you that on a frozen February morning in 1967, one of the most powerful men in Washington summoned Muhammad Ali to his private office and delivered an ultimatum that would have broken lesser men? What Ali said in response didn't just shock the congressman. It planted a seed of doubt that would grow for 20 years until it finally consumed him with regret. When the congressman's secret confession was found in his personal papers after his death, it revealed how a single conversation with Muhammad Ali had haunted one of America's most ruthless politicians for the rest of his life. February 18, 1967. The Russell Senate office building stood like a marble fortress against the Washington winter. Inside, Senator Thomas Hartwell sat behind his mahogany desk, staring at a file thick with classified reports. Hartwell wasn't just any senator. As chairman of the Armed Services Committee and ranking member on intelligence, he controlled more military secrets than some generals. Presidents sought his counsel. Defense contractors feared his displeasure. In the corridors of power, men whispered his name with the kind of respect usually reserved for royalty. But Thomas Hartwell had a problem named Muhammad Ali. 3 months earlier, Ali had refused induction into the United States Army. The boxing commissions had stripped him of his title. The State Department had confiscated his passport. Death threats arrived at his home daily. Most men would have crumbled under such pressure. Ali had only grown stronger, more defiant, more dangerous to the established order. The meeting had been arranged through intermediaries. No official records, no staff present, just a conversation between two men who represented opposing visions of America. Hartwell had summoned Ali not as a senator speaking to a citizen, but as a representative of the power structure speaking to someone who threatened its very foundation. Ali arrived at 10 a.m., accompanied only by his lawyer. The senator's office was a monument to American military might. Flags from every major conflict, photographs with 4-star generals, citations from defense contractors grateful for billions in approved contracts. Everything in the room was designed to remind visitors of the vast machinery of war that Hartwell helped control. "Sit down, Mr. Clay," Hartwell said, deliberately using Ali's birth name. "Muhammad Ali," the boxer corrected quietly. Hartwell ignored the correction. At 64, he was everything Ali wasn't. White, Southern, wealthy from birth, educated at Harvard Law. His family had owned slaves before the Civil War, and politicians afterward. For 3 generations, Hartwells had shaped American foreign policy from positions of unquestioned authority. "Do you understand why you're here?" Hartwell asked. Ali looked around the office, taking in the symbols of power, the photographs with presidents, the military memorabilia. "I figure you're going to try to change my mind about something." "Not try," Hartwell said. "I'm going to give you one final opportunity to make the right choice. This is your last chance to avoid complete destruction." The senator opened a thick folder. Inside were surveillance photos of Ali at the mosque, transcripts of his conversations with Nation of Islam leaders, financial records showing his declining income, copies of death threats his family had received. "We know everything about you," Hartwell said. "Every meeting, every phone call, every dollar you've lost since this foolishness began. We know your wife barely sleeps because of the threats. We know your mother cries herself to sleep worrying about your safety. We know you're running out of money and running out of friends." Ali listened without expression. "But it doesn't have to continue," Hartwell continued. "The president himself has authorized me to make you an offer. Report for military service, serve your country with honor. And all of this disappears. Your title gets restored. Your passport gets returned. The criminal charges vanish. You go back to being America's champion, instead of America's enemy." The offer hung between them like smoke from the senator's ever-present cigar. Hartwell had broken bigger men with smaller inducements. Senators had traded votes for less. Governors had betrayed their principles for a fraction of what he was offering Ali. "And if I refuse?" Ali asked. Hartwell's smile was winter cold. "Then we destroy you completely. Not just your career, your family. Everyone you've ever cared about, We'll make sure you never earn another dollar in this country. We'll make sure no one remembers your name except as a cautionary tale about what happens to people who defy their government." The senator leaned forward. "Let me be very clear about something, boy. You think you're some kind of martyr? Some kind of hero standing up for your principles? But you're not fighting the system. You're fighting the natural order of things. White men make the decisions. Black men follow orders. That's how it's always been. And that's how it's always going to be." For the first time since entering the office, Ali smiled. It wasn't the brash grin the world knew from press conferences. It was something quieter, more dangerous. "Senator Hartwell," Ali said. "Can I tell you what I think? You've got 60 seconds. I think you're scared," Ali said quietly. "Not of me personally, but of what I represent. Because if a black man from Louisville can tell the most powerful government in history to go to hell and survive it, that changes everything." Hartwell's face darkened. "You arrogant." "I'm not finished," Ali interrupted. "You keep talking about destroying me, but look around, Senator. You already have. You took my title. You took my passport. You took my ability to make a living. You've got people threatening my family every single day." Ali stood up, his full height imposing even in the palatial office. "But here's what you can't take. You can't take my soul. You can't take my beliefs. You can't take the knowledge that I'm doing what's right, even when everyone tells me it's wrong." Hartwell stubbed out his cigar violently. "This is your last chance, Clay. Take the deal or face the consequences. You know what the difference is between you and me, Senator?" Ali asked. "You've spent your whole life accumulating power so you can force other people to do what you want. I'm willing to lose everything to avoid doing what I know is wrong." Ali walked closer to the desk. "You sit in this office surrounded by all these symbols of American military might, making decisions that send other people's children to die in wars you'll never have to fight. You've never had to choose between your conscience and your comfort. You've never had to sacrifice anything for your principles." "I've served this country for 30 years, Hartwell said. "You've served yourself for 30 years. Ali corrected. "You've gotten rich off defense contracts. You've gotten powerful off other people's fear. You've built your entire career on sending young men to die for causes you profit from." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Ali had stripped away all of Hartwell's authority and left him facing truths he'd spent decades avoiding. "Let me ask you something, Senator," Ali continued. "What do you stand for? Not what committees you chair or what bills you've passed. What do you actually believe in that's worth sacrificing for?" Hartwell opened his mouth, but no words came. In 64 years of life, 30 years in politics, he had never been asked that question. More importantly, he had never asked it of himself. "I'll tell you what I believe," Ali said. "I believe that standing with the powerless is better than standing with the powerful. I believe that doing what's right is more important than doing what's profitable. I believe that my conscience is worth more than any title or any amount of money." Ali picked up his coat. "So here's my answer to your ultimatum, Senator. I'm not reporting for military service. I'm not apologizing for my beliefs. I'm not kneeling to you or anyone else. Because I'd rather be destroyed standing up for something I believe in than preserved kneeling for something I don't." Hartwell stared at the young boxer, genuinely speechless for the first time in his political career. Here was a man willing to sacrifice everything for his principles. Hartwell had spent 3 decades in Washington and had never met anyone like him. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," Hartwell said quietly. "Maybe," Ali agreed. "But it's my mistake to make, and I can live with the consequences, because I'll know I did what I thought was right." Ali walked to the door, then turned back. "Senator, 20 years from now, when this war is over and history judges who was right and who was wrong, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that Muhammad Ali came to your office and told you the truth about what this war really is. And I want you to think about whether you chose the right side." The door closed behind Ali with a sound like thunder. Thomas Hartwell sat alone in his office for 2 hours after Ali left. He stared at the surveillance photos, the classified reports, the symbols of power that filled his office. For the first time in his career, none of it felt impressive. It all felt hollow. The prosecution of Muhammad Ali proceeded as planned. Hartwell used his influence to ensure the Justice Department threw everything it had at the boxer. Ali was convicted, sentenced to 5 years in prison, and banned from boxing during his prime years. By all conventional measures, Hartwell had won, but victory felt like defeat. Over the following years, Hartwell watched as Ali maintained his dignity in the face of complete professional destruction. He watched as the boxer never complained, never begged, never showed anything but grace under impossible pressure. And slowly, painfully, Hartwell began to understand what real strength looked like. The turning point came in 1970. Hartwell's own son, Lieutenant James Hartwell, was killed in Vietnam at age 22. As the senator stood over his boy's grave at Arlington National Cemetery, he found himself thinking about Muhammad Ali's words, "Standing with the powerless is better than standing with the powerful." For the first time, Hartwell questioned whether the war he'd helped escalate was worth his son's life. The doubt grew over the years. Hartwell began quietly using his influence to support diplomatic solutions to international conflicts. He pushed for better veteran benefits. He questioned defense spending he had once rubber-stamped. His colleagues noticed the change but couldn't explain it. Hartwell never spoke publicly about his meeting with Ali, but in his private papers discovered after his death in 1987 was a letter he'd written but never sent. "Mr. Ali, 20 years ago, you sat in my office and told me that standing with the powerless was better than standing with the powerful. I thought you were naive. I thought you were weak. I thought I was teaching you about how the real world works. But you were teaching me about how the world should work. My son died in Vietnam in 1970. He was 22 years old, younger than you were when you refused to go. As I stood over his grave, I realized that you were right about everything. The war was wrong. The draft was immoral. Standing up for your principles, even when it costs you everything, is the only way to live with dignity. I spent 30 years accumulating power. But you taught me that real power comes from being willing to lose everything for what you believe in. You were the strongest man in that room, not because you could fight, but because you couldn't be broken. I'm sorry I tried to destroy you. I'm sorry I couldn't find the courage to stand with you when it mattered. And I'm sorry it took my son's death to understand what you tried to teach me when you were young enough to be my son too." The letter was found sealed in Hartwell's desk drawer. Never mailed but read so many times the paper was worn thin from handling. When Muhammad Ali died in 2016, Thomas Hartwell Jr. attended the funeral. He brought his father's letter and gave it to Ali's family. The gesture completed a conversation that had begun 49 years earlier in a Senate office where a young boxer had refused to kneel to power. If this story of moral courage moved you, remember that history is shaped by people who choose principle over comfort. Muhammad Ali walked into that Senate office as a disgraced athlete, and walked out as a man whose convictions changed his enemy's life forever.